Everyone avoided him. They pretended not to see him, the disheveled man in the corner, a walking reminder of human fragility they'd rather ignore with their morning lattes. Then Keanu Reeves walked in and said 4 words that silenced the entire cafe: "That's my friend." What happened next would leave everyone speechless, ashamed, and forever changed. After hearing this story, you'll never look at a homeless person the same way again. Have you ever looked away from someone because it was easier than facing their pain? Be honest with yourself as you watch this story unfold. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. The morning light cast long shadows through the windows of Artisan Brew, a small cafe nestled between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop in downtown Los Angeles. It was one of those crisp January mornings where the California sun promised warmth but hadn't quite delivered yet. Steam rose from ceramic mugs, laptop keys clicked steadily, and the hiss of the espresso machine punctuated conversations about screenplay drafts and startup ideas. In the far corner, partially hidden by a potted fiddle leaf fig, sat a man most patrons had wordlessly agreed to ignore. His weathered face was partially obscured by an unkempt salt and pepper beard. His hands, wrapped around an empty paper cup he'd found outside, were cracked and calloused, dirt embedded so deeply in the lines it seemed permanent. The army green jacket he wore had once been crisp and dignified, now it hung from his frame, frayed at the edges and missing 2 buttons. A plastic grocery bag containing everything he owned sat at his feet. His name was James Barrett, though no one in the cafe knew that. To them, he was simply an inconvenience, a reminder of human fragility they'd rather not confront before their morning coffee. Maya, the barista working the morning shift, had reluctantly allowed him to stay when he'd shuffled in an hour earlier. It was against policy, but the temperature had dropped to 40 degrees overnight, unusually cold for Los Angeles, and something in his eyes had stopped her from turning him away. Still, she kept glancing nervously in his direction, worried her manager might arrive and reprimand her for letting him occupy valuable real estate without purchasing anything. "He's been there forever," whispered Ethan, a regular who came in daily to work on his screenplay. "Doesn't he realize this isn't a shelter?" His companion, a woman with fashionably cut bangs and expensive-looking glasses, shrugged. "Just don't make eye contact. He'll probably leave soon." The cafe door opened, sending a brief chill through the room. Few people looked up, comings and goings were constant in this popular spot, but those who did quickly returned to their laptops and conversations. The man who entered was dressed simply, worn jeans, a plain black hoodie, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. His beard was neatly trimmed, and he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who doesn't need to announce his presence. Keanu Reeves approached the counter, his voice low as he ordered, "2 black coffees, please. And a breakfast sandwich, whatever's hot." Maya nodded, momentarily flustered as she recognized him beneath the cap brim. Celebrities weren't uncommon in this part of town, but Keanu had a certain aura about him, an unassuming presence that somehow made his fame more striking when you noticed it. She watched as he paid, leaving a $20 bill in the tip jar with the same casualness someone else might drop in spare change. What happened next caused several patrons to look up from their screens. Instead of claiming a table or heading back out the door, Keanu walked directly to the corner where James sat. Without hesitation, he placed one of the coffees on the small table and took the seat opposite him. "Thought you might want something hot," he said, his voice carrying just enough for those nearest to hear. The homeless man looked up, confusion momentarily crossing his weathered features before recognition sparked in his eyes. Thank you," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. A young woman at the next table nudged her friend and whispered behind her hand. A man in a business suit stared openly, coffee suspended halfway to his mouth. No one could quite believe what they were seeing: Keanu Reeves, Hollywood star, sitting down with the homeless man they'd all been deliberately ignoring. The conversation was quiet at first. Those straining to eavesdrop caught fragments. Been a while, didn't expect to see you here, looks different now. What they couldn't know was the depth of the moment unfolding before them. I've been watching your movies, James said, his hands trembling slightly as he wrapped them around the hot cup. That last one, with all the fighting, you did good, kid. Keanu smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. Learned from the best, didn't I? Still remember you drilling me on proper stance every day for 3 weeks straight. You were a quick study. And you were a tough teacher. The two men shared a laugh that seemed to bridge vast distances of time and circumstance. For Keanu, the moment was surreal. He'd been walking to a meeting about a potential new project when something familiar about the hunched figure in the army jacket had caught his eye through the cafe window. He'd changed course immediately, abandoning his schedule without a second thought. For James, the encounter felt like a dream, the kind you afraid to believe in case it dissolves upon waking. The world had become accustomed to looking through him, not at him. To be seen, truly seen, by anyone, let alone someone from his past life, sent tremors through the walls he'd built around himself. The cafe had fallen into a strange hush, the usual ambient noise of clinking cups and tapping keyboards muted as patrons tried to witness this unusual scene without appearing to stare. That's when it happened. James attempted to stand, perhaps overwhelmed by emotion or simply wishing to properly greet his old acquaintance. He gripped the edge of the table, pushed himself up, and collapsed. His legs gave out completely, and he crumpled to the floor with a thud that seemed to echo through the now silent space. The reaction was immediate and telling. A woman at a nearby table gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A man in expensive athletic wear grabbed his laptop bag and backed away, as if homelessness might be contagious. Someone whispered, loud enough to be heard, "Is he on drugs?" Maya rushed over with a cloth, hesitating a few feet away, unsure what to do. The shift manager had just arrived and was already reaching for the phone, presumably to call security or the police, anyone who might remove this sudden problem from their carefully curated space. "Give him some space," someone called out. "He's probably just drunk." If you were in that cafe at this moment, what would you have done? Would you have stepped forward to help a stranger in distress, or would you have remained in your seat, eyes averted? Type 1 in the comments if you think you would have helped. Type 2 if you were honest enough to admit you might have stayed silent. But Keanu was already on his knees beside James, one hand checking his pulse, the other gently cradling his head to prevent it from hitting the hard floor. When he looked up at the ring of onlookers, there was no anger in his eyes, just a profound sadness that made several people look away in shame. "That's my friend," he said quietly, but with enough firmness that the words carried throughout the cafe. The phrase hung in the air, simple yet devastating in its implication. In 3 words, he had transformed James from an object of scorn or pity into a person with connections, with history, with value. The shift manager froze, phone in hand. Maya stood motionless, clutching her cloth. A man who had been edging toward the door stopped mid-step. "His name is James Barrett," Keanu continued, his voice steady. "He served in the 3rd Infantry Division. 2 tours in combat zones. He received the Silver Star for pulling 12 men from a burning convoy under enemy fire." Each sentence fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples of discomfort through the crowd. In a corner booth, a young man in a worn UCLA sweatshirt set down his coffee and approached. He knelt beside Keanu without speaking and helped position James into a more comfortable position. "I was a medic," he said simply. 8th Regiment. Together, they lifted James onto a chair. The young veteran checked his vitals with practiced movements while Keanu kept a hand on his friend's shoulder. "I am okay," James mumbled, embarrassment coloring his face as consciousness fully returned. Just got dizzy. Happens sometimes. When did you last eat? The young medic asked. James looked away. Yesterday. Maybe. Keanu squeezed his shoulder and looked up at Maya. Could we get some water, please? And that sandwich I ordered? She nodded quickly and hurried away, grateful for the clear direction. As the initial shock subsided, the cafe began to buzz with whispers. Keanu either didn't notice or chose to ignore them. His focus remained entirely on James, who was now sipping water with shaking hands. How long have you been on the streets? Keanu asked, his voice low enough that only those nearest could hear. James shrugged. 3 years, give or take. After Sarah died, things just fell apart. He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Turns out military training doesn't prepare you for losing your wife to cancer. The young medic, his name was David, they would later learn, checked James's pulse again. His blood pressure is probably low. Dehydration, malnutrition. Seen it before. From across the room, someone had called emergency services. As they waited, a strange thing began to happen. The atmosphere in the cafe shifted, as if the collective conscience of the room was awakening from a deep slumber. A woman approached with a bottle of orange juice from her own bag. For the sugar, she explained, setting it down carefully. An elderly man with a cane hobbled over. I have a brother who served, he said, speaking directly to James with the first real eye contact he'd received from a stranger in months. Thank you for your service, sir. By the time the paramedics arrived, a small crowd had gathered around James, not to gawk, but to offer what they could, a granola bar, a spare scarf, simple words of gratitude or support. As the paramedics prepared to transport him, Keanu spoke to the gathered crowd, his voice quiet but compelling. I met James in 1995. I was training for a role and knew nothing about military protocol. He was the technical consultant assigned to the project, one of the best the studio had ever worked with. He paused, a faint smile crossing his face at the memory. He was the toughest teacher I'd ever had. Made me do push-ups whenever I got the details wrong. Said if I was going to portray a soldier, I'd better not dishonor those who actually lived it. The cafe was silent now, every person hanging on his words. He taught me discipline, respect, how to handle weapons safely, but more than that, he showed me what it meant to care about the person standing next to you. To have integrity even when no one foot's watching. Keanu's eyes found James's, he became a friend. A real one. James looked down, uncomfortable with the attention yet visibly moved. We lost touch after the project ended. Life moved on, my career took off, and his. He trailed off. Life happens, James supplied, his voice stronger now. Made some bad choices after Sarah got sick. Then made some worse ones after she was gone. I saw him outside the public library 2 weeks ago, Keanu continued. Recognized him immediately, despite everything. And you know what he said when I approached him? He looked around at the crowd. He said he was proud of me. That I'd done good work. That's it, no requests, no mention of his situation. Just, pride in someone else's journey. Maya, who had been listening intently from behind the counter, felt tears prick her eyes. She thought about how she'd nearly asked James to leave when he first entered, how they all had seen him as nothing more than an inconvenience. As the paramedics prepared to wheel James out, Keanu slipped a business card into the lead EMT's hand. He'll be staying at the Wilshire Hotel tonight, he said firmly. IV already called ahead. After he's cleared medically, that's where he goes, not back to the street. Tomorrow, We'll connect him with the veteran services he should have had years ago. He looked directly at the shift manager, who had been hovering uncertainly nearby. And his tab here is covered. Permanently. The manager nodded quickly. Of course, Mr. Reeves. Anytime. Before following the stretcher out, Keanu paused and addressed the cafe one last time. Maybe today you couldn't see who he was. Maybe all you saw was someone taking up space. But now you know. His voice remained gentle, yet there was an unmistakable intensity to his words. And maybe next time you see someone like him, you'll remember James. You'll remember that behind every face is a story we can't possibly understand unless we take the time to listen. As he turned to leave, a slow, deliberate clap broke the silence. It came from David, the young veteran. Another person joined in, then another, until the whole cafe was filled with quiet, respectful applause, not for the celebrity in their midst, but for the reminder of our shared humanity he had delivered. In the weeks that followed, the story spread. Not through press releases or calculated social media campaigns, Keanu had made no announcement, sought no publicity for his actions, but through the words of those who had witnessed it. The baristas who had been working that day. The screenwriter who abandoned his laptop to help. The young veteran who found himself inspired to start a support group for homeless ex-military personnel. For James Barrett, that morning marked the beginning of a long, difficult journey back from the brink. There would be medical treatments, counseling sessions, setbacks and victories. The road to recovery from 3 years of homelessness is neither short nor straight. But for the first time since losing his wife, he had something precious, possibility. And for the 37 people who happened to be in Artisan Brew that Wednesday morning, something fundamental had shifted in their understanding of the world. They had witnessed the power of 4 simple words, "That's my friend," to transform how we see each other. Some would later say it changed how they moved through the city, how they looked at the faces they had trained themselves to ignore. Others would point to it as the moment they realized that compassion isn't a finite resource to be rationed, but a muscle that grows stronger with use. Maya, for her part, would never again hesitate to offer a cup of hot coffee to someone seeking shelter from the cold. And when her manager questioned the practice, she would simply say, "Everyone deserves to be warm. Everyone deserves to be seen." 6 months later, a small ceremony took place at a veterans memorial in a quiet corner of Los Angeles. James Barrett, clean-shaven and standing straighter than he had in years, received long-overdue recognition for his military service. In the small crowd that gathered to honor him, there was no distinction between those who arrived in expensive cars and those who carried their possessions in backpacks. Keanu stood in the back, his presence unremarked upon by the press. He wasn't there as a celebrity, but as a friend, fulfilling the most basic and profound of human promises, to see each other, to remember each other, to stand together when the world would rather look away. As the ceremony concluded, James made his way through the crowd to where Keanu stood. The 2 men embraced without words, their shared journey beyond the need for explanation. "Thank you," James finally said, "for recognizing me when I'd forgotten myself." Keanu shook his head. "You would have done the same." And in that simple exchange lay the heart of the story that had touched so many, the recognition that heroism often has nothing to do with grand gestures or public acclaim. Sometimes, it's as simple as remembering someone's name when the rest of the world has forgotten they exist. Sometimes, it's as profound as saying, with conviction, "That's my friend." Have you ever looked at someone and decided they didn't belong in your space? Have you ever averted your eyes from a stranger in need, telling yourself it wasn't your problem? After hearing this story, might you think differently the next time? Consider for a moment, who in your life deserves to be seen, truly seen, that you've been overlooking. Perhaps a colleague whose struggles you've dismissed, a neighbor whose story you've never bothered to learn, or even a family member whose pain you've grown accustomed to ignoring. If this story has changed your perspective on how you see others, even slightly, type yes in the comments. And share with us, what small act of recognition might you offer someone today? Because sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do for another human being is simply to acknowledge their existence, to counter their invisibility with our attention, their isolation with our connection. Sometimes, the revolution begins with nothing more than meeting someone's eyes and saying, "I see you." The power of recognition goes beyond a single encounter in a cafe. It ripples outward, changing not just one life but potentially many. In the months following that fateful morning, several patrons from Artisan Brew found themselves volunteering at local veterans organizations. Maya started a suspended coffee program, where customers could prepay for drinks that would be given to those who couldn't afford them. The young veteran, David, eventually founded a peer support group specifically for veterans struggling with housing insecurity. Small changes, perhaps, in the grand scheme of things. But to those whose lives were touched, they made all the difference. And James? His journey wasn't easy or straightforward. Recovery rarely is. There were setbacks and difficult days, moments when the pull of old habits felt stronger than the promise of new beginnings. But having someone who believed in him, who remembered who he had been before the world wore him down, gave him something essential, a bridge back to himself. 6 months after their reunion, James stood before a small gathering at a community center, his posture straight in a way it hadn't been in years. The hardest part of being homeless isn't the cold or the hunger, he told the group of volunteers and social workers. It's the invisibility. It's watching people look through you day after day until you start to wonder if you actually exist. He paused, emotion making his voice rough. One person seeing you, really seeing you, can be enough to bring you back from that edge. For me, it was an old friend who remembered my name when I'd almost forgotten it myself. In the back of the room, Keanu listened quietly, no different from any other attendee. No special recognition, no celebrity treatment. Just a friend, supporting another friend. Later, when asked by a volunteer if he planned to publicize his involvement with veterans' causes, Keanu simply shook his head. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about people like James, who gave everything for their country and received too little in return." The truth is, heroes rarely announce themselves. They don't wear capes or seek spotlights. Sometimes, they are just ordinary people who choose, in critical moments, to see beyond appearances, beyond discomfort, beyond the artificial boundaries we create between us and them. Sometimes, they are people who have the courage to say, of someone society has discarded, "That's my friend." And in doing so, they remind us of what we all could be, if only we were brave enough to see each other clearly, to recognize in every face, however weathered or worn, the reflection of our shared humanity. Because in the end, that's what Keanu did that morning. Not an act of charity, but an act of recognition. He didn't just help James, he remembered him. And in that remembering, he offered something far more valuable than money or fame could ever provide, the simple, profound dignity of being known. Perhaps that's the true measure of a person, not their success or status or wealth, but their willingness to look into the eyes of someone society has deemed invisible and say, without hesitation or qualification, "I see you. I know you. You matter." In a world that moves too quickly, that values efficiency over compassion and productivity over presence, such moments of genuine recognition are revolutionary acts. They challenge the very foundations of a system that categorizes people as either valuable or dispensable based on what they can produce or consume. They remind us that worth isn't earned through accomplishment or possession, but inherent in our existence as human beings, connecting and caring for one another. And they invite us to consider a radical possibility, that the solution to many of our deepest social problems might not lie in grand policies or sweeping reforms, but in our willingness to truly see each other, to remember each other, to claim each other as friends despite all the forces that would divide us. So the next time you walk past someone society has taught you to ignore, perhaps you'll remember this story. Perhaps you'll recall the quiet power contained in those 4 simple words, "That's my friend." And perhaps, in that remembering, you'll find the courage to see differently, to act differently, to be the person who bridges the artificial divides we've created between ourselves and others. Because in the end, what greater purpose could there be than to recognize the humanity in every person we encounter, to counter isolation with connection, indifference with attention, despair with hope? What greater calling than to be the one who says, in word or deed, "You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. You are one of us." In that recognition lies the seed of transformation, not just for individuals, but for communities, for societies, for our shared human future. And it begins with a choice, a simple yet profound choice that each of us faces countless times every day, to look away, or to truly see. To remain comfortable within the boundaries of our carefully curated lives, or to extend ourselves into the messy, beautiful reality of human connection. To pass by, or to pause and say those 4 world-changing words. "That's my friend." The choice is yours. What will you decide? This is Motivation for Success, where we tell stories that restore your faith in humanity. If this story moved you, type yes in the comments and tell us, who have you been overlooking lately? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that open hearts and change lives. And remember, kindness is quiet, but it echoes forever.